There we go. So again, for those of you who are just joining us, we have with us tonight Mark Talaga. He's going to talk to us about Giftedness Unplugged, activating talent beyond gaming. And Mark has been counseling gifted individuals for over 10 years and is the owner and director of the Center for Identity Potential. Mark's experience with gifted counseling began in 2012 under the mentorship of Andy Mahoney, a pioneer and expert in the field of counseling the gifted. Mark is highly respected in the field of gifted counseling and has published numerous articles on topics related to giftedness and counseling. He's also sought after speaker and consultant, provides training and consultation services to schools, universities, and mental health organizations throughout the United States. A former video game professional, so real world experience here, Mark utilizes his knowledge of gaming and technology to create a strong relationship with many of the kids with whom he works. Through his own personal struggles with executive functioning, raise your hands if you've been there, validating his giftedness and finding purpose and meaning in the world, Mark has developed expertise in education and has skills necessary to help gifted children activate their potential, living more authentic and fulfilling lives. So we are going to turn it over to Mark to share with us his information tonight. I'm excited for the presentation as I have my own students and children who I think will relate to this very much. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share your screen and do whatever you need to do. And folks, as you have questions, make sure to put them in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Miranda. And thank you to CAGT for hosting this and letting me be a part of it. I'm very excited. I love talking about this topic. I'm going to share my screen here. And then I got to pull up my own version of the screen. All right. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about giftedness in gaming, the connection between the two. I was talking with Miranda before we got started around, a lot of people will ask if I'm pro gaming, anti gaming, and the truth is it's neither, right? For me, it's about how the gaming is being integrated into the context of the life of the gifted kid or gifted individual. I'm sure some of you out there are probably gamers as well. And is it activating potential? Is it supporting them in their lives in one way or another? Or is it becoming some level of replacement, or is it becoming the sole focus? And that's where a lot of the calls come into our center, come into me, about how we deal with that. So the presentation today is going to be geared more towards that as an issue in people's lives. But, if you have any questions at all related to this topic, please, I love to be interrupted. It does not bother me at all. It does not throw me off my flow. So please just have at it and type questions in the chat. All right, so let's get started. Oh, and my first picture doesn't work. How great. That's fine. Just imagine there's a really cool picture there. So the first thing we're going to talk about, this is a little 101. Obviously, we know this. Gifted children, and this is part of the reason why gaming specifically is an issue in the gifted community. Even though it exists everywhere, it's heightened and it's bigger in the gifted world. Because gifted children crave the ability to master and to demonstrate ability, right? All gifted people want to show what they can do. There's an inherent knowledge that they have something within them that can do something at a higher, more advanced level somewhere along the line, right? The issue becomes if you have these kids that want to show they can be masters of their domains and whatever that is, or show their ability, what if there are learning challenges? What if there are issues in their learning profiles where there are severe gaps in their development, how they develop their brain and they develop their way of interacting in the world is not in sync, right? A lot of kids are way far ahead and simultaneously way behind or have relative normative ability in certain areas, and that creates gaps, right? And those gaps are really the main issues that come across in the world of gifted land. So a lot of people will say, well, that's 2E, right? That's twice exceptional. They have giftedness and they have some level of diagnosis. My way of looking at that is way more broad. It's like you got a kid that is excellent writer, top tier, puts together ideas in ways you've never seen before, but they really struggle in math. That's 2E to me as well. That gap is the same gap we're talking about when it comes to a developmental profile, right? And so sometimes these get in the way of children being able to display mastery and show ability. The other is more of a nuanced version that may not affect everybody, but there's some kids who are in the world of gifted and they just have interests that are way outside of the norm of like STEM or high acceleration or being really good at math. There's some kids that are masters in the humanities, but there's not exactly gifted programming or gifted messaging around how you accelerate that part of your life, right? Or they want to be, a street artist, graffiti artist, right? Who's going to teach them how to do that in a way that's supporting their giftedness? And so sometimes that gets in the way of developing mastery, right? Okay, so enter our nemesis, gaming, right? The first part is gaming, and this is no offense to any teachers out there, is the ultimate teacher. This is why it's $1 billion industry, because it has ability to utilize frameworks, clear rule sets, scaffolding, immediate feedback, and variability and difficulty. It is a perfect way for a gifted kid who wants to go really, really fast to be able to master something in a way that makes perfect sense because it's designed to make sense. And it's designed to have a level of challenge that can go up, 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 up as high as you like, so that they're always in that kind of flow state of feeling challenged but not overwhelmed, or they're not bored by it. And even if they are bored by it, there's 40 billion other games you can jump into, right? So you can always find your flavor. So think about how those two interact now and how that can sometimes cause an issue, which is what we're going to go into. Now, this is going to be where I kind of talk over to the audience. Now, I can't see anybody. So I'm assuming there's people there, and I'm not just talking to Miranda, but it's helpful to talk to Miranda. Yeah, go ahead.
Should we be still seeing your first slide?
No. Oh, have
Okay.
I been not moving?
It's not
Uh-oh.
been moving though.
Okay, well, now we have the real problem. Let me switch something over real quick, guys. Hold on. Thank you for pointing that out because
Of
that was
course.
not what happened.
Nothing worse than preparing a presentation and then it not functioning right. And you're like, oh, that was a lot of work for.
I know. That's all right. Well, we're talking about technology, aren't we? That's just part of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just
Sometimes it's such a blessing and sometimes it's such a struggle.
hold on. Let me share the screen correctly. Usually I can do this. And you tell me if you can see this screen.
I see your whole Canva. Now I see just your screen.
Right. Okay, we did.
Presentation mode now.
All right. Okay, so now we're at gaming as the ultimate teacher. Right. Frameworks, clear rule set, scale. And I can make this available to anybody that wants these slides or if I feel like I'm going too quick.
Awesome. Yeah, we'd love for you to send them to us after you're done.
Absolutely. So now I'm going to ask a question to any of those brave people that want to volunteer and answer. What would happen if you said to your kids who may be more attached to gaming than you feel comfortable with, you said, you know what? We're making a new rule. There's going to be no games, no screens, no electronics during the week. What would happen? Can I get some responses or your response of what you would say? Yeah, actually, I want the parents' response. What would you say if I said, you need to do this? Let me know if anybody comes up with anything.
While we're waiting for the chat, I'll tell you exactly what happened when I did that.
Yeah.
So what if I said that to my children?
Yeah. And you're saying, okay, look, here's what we're going to try now. We're going to say no games or screens during the week.
So we tried that. And then it was always the sneaking downstairs to play the games because we don't have it. We have it in the basement. And then it became a grades based. So if they had C's, they could only play video games during the week if they had A's and B's. So if they were maintaining their grades and getting their jobs done, then they could play video games. But if they had C's or lower, then they would, and this was middle school, then they would have to be, they would be off screens for the week. They only got screens on the weekend. If they had D's or F's, screens were gone until the grades went back up.
I got you.
So that was, and it went pretty well. And if they were missing assignments, that was also a thing where, like, if you're missing assignments, you can't be on a screen either, or you can't do games.
It's difficult to track, of all the things that we're watching and what counts as what. Yeah.
And that was it was too many stipulations, but I think it was at least kept the grades at A's and B's.
I love it. Any other responses? If not, I can move on.
I haven't gotten any responses in chat yet, but a lot of people like to do this while they're cooking, so they may not have.
They just want to listen. They're like, I don't want to participate. Yeah. All right, so here's some of the typical responses I get. Right, some will just be like, oh, wouldn't that be wonderful, right? Or, well, they'd figure out a way around it. I can't outsmart them, or it's not worth the fight, or we've tried that and it just didn't work, or I don't know how I would do that. I don't know how I'd implement that in my household. Or just it's just not realistic, right? These are very common responses that I get from parents, and it's a real struggle. And there's a reason it's a real struggle. And it has to deal with the fact that you're dealing with the giftedness of it all, right? And so on some level, if you're dealing with extreme giftedness or you're dealing with a problem that's gone beyond the norm, normal interventions won't work. Because if you do a normative intervention, like a timer or something like this is the family contract, for a lot of people, that's going to enact a lot of this gifted manipulation, using their high levels of perceptual reasoning to figure out ways around it, going into this argument phase. And it becomes, like you said, very too difficult to track. So sometimes, yes, you need just to simplify it and you can get it to work. But for some people, they have tried this and it's like nothing works, right? And so, what I try to tell those parents that feel like that won't work for me or I don't see that way forward is that you really need to understand this problem is way more complex than you realize for a lot of these kids. So, their development, their learning issues, their explosive emotions, the high level of reasoning, their difficulty with holding children accountable to themselves create a complex situation. And I want to underline that last part. There are a lot of parents in the world that I work with who don't feel they have the right to really hold their kids accountable to themselves. And what I mean by that is accountable to what those kids ultimately want for their own lives, right? We're not here to project what we think our kids should do. Oh, well, you're good at this, so that's what you should do. But we're there to say, I can tell you want to do well in school. That matters to you. And I know that that's a part of you. And I'm going to try to help you hold you accountable to that. And that's where a lot of these boundaries will come from. And because the gifted kid can kind of loop you into an intellectual reasoning of why that's not the issue, you can get lost and get very tricky. But I want you to know as parents, you have the right to hold them accountable to that growth process, developmental process. And sometimes games get in the way of that. And so sometimes we have to create interventions that deviate from the norm, or we have to adjust them, or we have to realize it's a process, or the way we present games into the life of our kids has to be examined, and how we use them and what they're there for. And so, like, I have two little kids, right? I got a 6.5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I've introduced them into gaming. And one of the things that I told them when I gave them, I said, gaming is a place where you're supposed to have joy and fun with others. And if you don't, meaning you're fighting and you're yelling and you're crying, it is not being used for the correct purpose and it's gone. Because I'm trying to teach them what it's supposed to be and how you're supposed to enjoy things in a certain way, right? I practice what I'm preaching. Okay. So, but a lot of time parents feel this fear, right? If I start to really deal with this problem, if I really start to hold my kid accountable, and I start to really put their feet to the fire and put some boundaries in our household, I'm afraid of what's going to happen. Because sometimes there's issues underneath the gaming that are big. And sometimes we have parents out there, and I'm sure I'm not talking to everybody, but I know there's at least one parent out there, hopefully, not hopefully, but that is dealing with an issue where if I were to take my kids' stuff away, they would be explosive. They would be threatening to harm themselves or others. They would be throwing chairs through windows. And that happens. And so when you're dealing with that, a lot of these people come to me, the games are wrecking our lives. The games are wrecking our lives. Not really. You have a lot more going on underneath the hood. And that's what I want parents to understand, that when you're dealing with a gifted kid who has that level of explosiveness and you're taking something away, they are coping with something through the gaming. They are trying to hold on to that mastery that they need to feel in their life because they feel like they don't have it anywhere else. And a lot of times this appears in school, right? A lot of these kids, this is happening around school age. Their academics are a challenge on some level. Well, that's crazy. They're gifted. They should be good at everything. No, if any of you have been around gifted kids long enough, you know that's not true, right? They're good at some things, sure. They have interest in some areas, and it seems to circumvent all their typical issues they have and some of these more simple things, right? Remember, for the gifted, the simple is complex and the complex is simple. And so when you're dealing with something around something simple, quote unquote, like setting a boundary, and it gets way out of proportion, there is more going on, okay? And so that is what I want people to help people how they can explore that, how they can evaluate for that, and what that really looks like. And here's another thing that I want to really give you perspective on. If everything I'm saying tracks for you guys and holds water, that they're craving mastery, they need something, but they could be struggling in other areas of their life, and they get rigid and inflexible around it. And you're saying, no, you just need to put the games down and perform. I need you to be an academic machine, right? Now, not parents aren't really saying that, but that could be the perception that they're getting, that it's grades, 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 grades. You need to perform. And if that kid is struggling or is misdiagnosed or has underlying issues or is not getting the support or they've been overcompensating since they were 2, and you're asking them to just perform, what choice do they have? They give up the gaming and they face something that they're not prepared for at all, that they feel like they're destined to fail in? Or do they hold on for dear life to their coping mechanism? And that's what we have to understand. You have to understand there is a vulnerability in some of these kids that when you address the gaming head on, that if you miss that, and if you jump over it and go to the behavioral intervention, the normative view of, well, this, you know, blog I read said I need to put a boundary and a timer in, and that's what's going to work. And you miss the vulnerability, it's not going to work. And that's why. Right. And so, at the center here and other, my colleagues that I work with, we are huge believers in assessment. We want to know how that kid learns, how they take in information, how they put out information, where their struggles are. Yes, we want to know where their strengths are, but we also want to know where their vulnerabilities. I don't know why none of my pictures are working. And I think it's because I had them all AI generated, but something's up. That's a bummer. Because that was a good one here. So now a lot of people talk about gaming addiction. Addiction's a tricky word, and I don't like to use it very often. And because I'm not an expert in addictions, I have education in it and I have some experience with it, but I'm not an expert in it. I don't like to pretend like I'm working at it from an addictions model. But what I do know about addictions is that a lot of it occurs or is exacerbated by a lot of repression. The idea that I can't be who I am, I can't express aspects of myself, I can't, display what I'm really good at. I sense that I have more to me, but I don't know how to get it out, or I'm not allowed to get it out, or the way I want to do it would be shut down or invalidated by any number of systems in my life. And when that happens over and over and over and over again to a person, they don't know another way out. And then some of their genetic material that is more prone to addictive behavior or lack of impulse control can get switched on. And then all of a sudden that becomes their life because they've never really dealt with the core issue of what is it that they are trying to express in this world and in this life, right? I got a kid who, gaming was the primary symptom of coming in. And, I don't want to give too much information other than he was one of those kids that's like rail thin, right? And there was a part that I picked up on that he had this sense of he wanted to develop himself physically, but he literally was invalidated by the way he looked, his body type, his physiology, his view of what that would mean, him having no idea how to even get into that process. But the more we explored that there was this part of him that wanted to develop himself physically, the more we saw his motivation start to kick in. We saw his executive function start to work. We saw all these other places in his life, his mood would be lifted because he was developing an aspect of himself. And from that expression that would sometimes be made fun of by other kids or be looked at like a silly thing for, a kid that, looks like a microphone stand to want, he's now finding that, no, this is more who I am in life. I'm expressing it. And that to me is a better cure for gaming than anything else. Now, addiction is a very complicated subject. I'm not saying here's the fix and that's all addiction ever is, but I want to put it in a context that might help understand why it looks and acts a lot like an addiction. Okay. So, my big belief is that I don't want to leave you in the fear or in the pain of it or just in describing what the problem is. I want to give you something that you can do. And really, that's what we describe as hope here at the center. Hope is having a way forward, a pathway that you can see and take steps on. Then all of a sudden we have hope. And a lot of people that are in this situation around gaming can start to feel hopeless. The kids feeling hopeless, the parents are feeling hopeless, the teachers are feeling hopeless, and everybody feels stuck. And gaming gets scapegoated as, well, if they just put their screens down during class, they'd be able to learn. Not necessarily. That might mean they just have to face a vulnerability in their life that is brutal and they're stressed about, but they have no way to express it, right? It's complicated. So another pictureless screen. I think it's very important to have frank conversations as parents. And we are allowed as parents to learn something and change our tune or our framework or of understanding. And it's a big way of showing vulnerability when we go to our kids and say, you know what? I'm starting to understand why it's as hard as it is for you to stop. I don't think I realized that before about you, about what this issue really brings up for you, that it goes way more deep. And I don't fully understand it. And I don't think you fully understand it. But I'm starting to realize how big it is. If you just say that, your kid, their first layer of defenses will melt because you're finally talking to them outside of the performance issue, the behavioral issue, and you're getting down to that we have an issue here and we're seeing it and we're respecting that it is not easy. And then we can take it out of them. There's a lot of systems in your life. There's a lot of people in your life. It's not just you. And I don't think this is just a you problem. I think we need to look at how we're dealing with this as a family unit, how we're dealing with this within your educational system and where we might need some more support there. We're going to take it outside of just you and we're going to go to the systems view of how we deal with this issue in life, right? That is where you're most effective. I'm a big believer that a lot of people are like, oh, come talk to my kid and do individual therapy. I'm like, nah. You come in my door, we're talking with families, we're talking with the schools, we're getting everybody involved. Because guess what? They all have an effect and they're all getting different information, and we need everybody on the same page because this stuff is complicated. We work as a team. And sometimes, in the land of gifted, this is why I love that you have these talks through CAGT. That's why I love that you have these organizations like CAGT that do this stuff, because it provides a place where you are not alone and you're doing it as a team, because that is what I believe helps, right? And so, and when we talk about integrating changes into the life and about, hey, we're going to shift the way we do things, we are never framing it as a punishment for the kid. This is not because you are bad and you can't deal with it. It's more like, I'm noticing you're having a very difficult time self-monitoring and self-regulating. And you may not even be aware of it, but I can tell that it's difficult for you to transition or engage in your executive functioning, your prefrontal cortex, when it comes to working games, around homework, around family responsibilities, around dinner time, whatever. And so because of that, I think we're going to create something that's a little more supportive, a little more in line with how we're going to have these things. And then once we have these responsibilities met, yeah, we got game time. We got stuff. We're not monsters. I always say parents are benevolent dictators. We're in charge, but we're going to be kind about it. We're going to be, conscious of what, we're struggling with kids. Okay. All right. And so I've mentioned this earlier, but the need for comprehensive assessment can be very key, especially if your kid is complicated. The more complicated, the more complex, the more profoundly gifted, the more asynchronous, the more whatever, the more the need for I'm not talking about a whisk, or, Johnson Woodcock or whatever it is. I'm talking as much data as you can gather about how they learn and how they take in information and sensory input into this world, how they receive it and how they produce it. That is what we're looking for, input out, right? The typical gifted profile that comes in through our doors, and a lot of people probably know this, but is a kid with exceedingly high levels of what we call verbal comprehension index, VCI, which is just their storehouse of knowledge and language. That's like 99 percentile. Their reasoning is typically really, really, really high. Their ability to reason abstractly and make connections and conclusions, but their processing is low. And so all of a sudden you have an input output problem, because that's what processing is, how you take stuff in and take stuff out. And so a gifted kid can overcompensate with their natural ability for so long, and then all of a sudden the wheels start to shake off and the challenge starts to grow. But we don't realize it's a learning issue because they've never had it before. They've always had it, they just covered it up. And so when we start to uncover the neurological reasons that our kid is struggling or is anxious or is depressed around their ability to express themselves in life or do well in their responsibilities, when we start to uncover that, we get a lot more clues as to what we need to do to better support them and scaffold up their development, right? Because I don't care if a kid's in the 9th percentile processing, it can be developed. It'll never maybe be in the 99th percentile, but we don't look at it as a weakness. That's why you'll hear me use the word vulnerability a lot, because it's an area of vulnerability that needs to be protected at first and developed over time. Because sometimes with a gifted kid over their lifespan, the thing they struggle with the most and have the most vulnerability in can be their greatest strength later on in life. Okay. And that's what you need to remember. And so, yeah, and then how we activate that development that matters to the kid, how we activate the expression, how we activate these different parts of their potential once we start to understand what they really need in order for input and output to be more successful. And there's a million different variations that make it confusing, but that's more or less the gist. Any other questions, Brenda? Are we doing so good? Everybody's just listening right now. Like you're muted. Sorry, Miranda.
We're doing good. There's people that are wondering if they're going to have access to this later, so I'm just reassuring them. But right now, we just have lots of listening. Same with me,
Good.
absorbing.
Good. I always have to check because I'm like, are you listening or are you bored to tears? So
can I maybe interject a question?
I like to check.
That might be something for myself. You mentioned that about like blaming everything on screen time. And it's something I hear a lot, like blaming all the behavior issues on social media or blaming all the behavior issues we're seeing now. And I don't know that we're seeing a new behavioral issues. I think we're seeing behaviors present differently that have always been there. But can you kind of touched on it? And I think it's something as educators and as parents that we tend to like fall back on this. It's the screen time. It's the social media. And I feel like, and from what I'm hearing you say, is that it's not that the use of the screens and the social media is a symptom of a different problem. And we have to understand what that problem is, because the screen time and social media isn't the problem. We need to uncover, it's a symptom, and we need to uncover the issue. Am I correct in kind of?
You nailed it. Yes, that is perfect. You are correct. So what you're looking for on some level is step one, what is the behavior representing? Now I go to places of, it's mastery, it's development, it's being in an area where I'm an expert, and that's satisfying the need, and that's the purpose of the behavior around gaming. For some people, it's around connection, right? Social media is a perfect example. Some people are so dependent on social media because they're kind of living in this pseudo-corrective state of because they're lonely, or they don't have the skill around connecting and relationships and creating social things that have meaning and depth or that fit who they are as a person, because gifted kids need very specific kind of people in their lives. Sometimes the social media can be the coping mechanism for that. I don't know how to really connect, or I like my friends to be online. And that's still social, right? And it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, technically.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about the bigger issue here. It is difficult for you to connect in that in-person way. And there are reasons for that. And there are vulnerabilities around why that's hard. A lot of people want to be like, well, I have social anxiety. End of story. I'm like, well, social anxiety is a cluster of symptoms, but it is all based around skill. It is all based around things that can be developed if you have the right scenario, the right foundational understanding of it, all these kind of things. So I'm not a big believer in, the label is the reason that I'll never do X, Y, and Z. I'm a big believer in that label is what makes it so difficult for you to engage in what you want to engage in. And there has to be some level of acceptance around what I really struggle with. And it's a part of who I am. And I'm not going to throw it away or pretend it doesn't exist or cope, in a way where I'm getting my needs sort of met. Right? Because it has bigger implications later on. And that's where the fear is. I fear if my kids don't break away from the screen, something bad's going to happen. They're going to be dependent forever. I mean, that's a real fear, right? And there are absolutely 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds living at home that feel they can't break that cycle. And a lot of my clients are in their 20s, and they're finally now their cosmic eggs are cracking and they're starting to engage in the world because this has been such an issue for them, right? But you put it beautifully, Miranda, and I appreciate you saying that. So yes, we're identifying the areas where they're struggling or where they want more support or where they have potential. Now, the way you gauge potential is more around the lines of, does it bother them that they're not doing well? Is it having an effect on them? I had a kid earlier today that I was talking about, he wants to be more social, and his mom brought up like chess club. And he's like, chess is boring. Now, when I hear boring, that can mean a million different things. It's either overly challenging, underly challenging, whatever. And I said, if you were better at chess, would it be less boring? And he goes, no. And I knew right then, I'm like, you know what? Then chess isn't for you. There's no potential there. But some kids will say, yeah, actually, I would enjoy it more if I was better at it. That tells me innately they know that they have skill or the ability somewhere to do well, but they have no idea how to get there. And so we say, well, they have potential in it. And how do we activate it? How do we look at the systems, the supports, the scaffolding to help them feel activated towards that development, rather than, forcing them to do something that really isn't in there. I think I mentioned this, I do want to talk about some behavioral interventions. Once you understand what you're really working against, once you have a better clarity of the vulnerabilities in place, then you can start to go to those behavioral interventions. Then you can start to say, we're going to build a family contract around the skill development of whatever, right? And that's going to include how the gaming is introduced into our household, right? I always tell parents that, your home is an identity, it's an expression of you. And we want our homes to express an identity. And sometimes we're always working towards it, right? Like my wife and I, we wanted our home to express peace and comfort and rest. And I have a 6.5-year-old and a 4-year-old. So we're not always there, but we are trying. We know that is more what we're working towards and how we're trying to help everybody express themselves. So, it's progress, not getting there, right? It's not perfection. Sometimes you can create a priority list, right? Once you get your schoolwork done and your responsibilities done, then you know what? I'm going to help you schedule as much gaming time in as you want. I'm going to give you every spare minute I can spare to you for your gaming because I know how important it is to, you could do stuff like that. It's an Adlerian technique. Alfred Adler was a Freud contemporary, but you can do things like that. But what you're really teaching is prioritization. Now they're like, yeah, but they're just going to rush through their homework and get right to the games. And maybe so. Again, we're not looking for perfection. We want to keep it in the context of its progress and how do we push them and how do we give them that more understanding of what they need for regulation and all this kind of stuff. Um, Again, things like timers, alarms, notifications. It only works when they have the developmental ability to self-regulate or self-monitor. Otherwise, you need to adjust. I have told parents that they need to buy a safe and they need to take the power supply to the gaming console and put it in the safe every night because no matter where they hid it, their kids found it. And they're like, we don't know what to do. And I'm like, yes, you do. You're not willing to do it. I was challenging them a little bit. Like, you can stop them if you really wanted to. But again, that creates this what feels like a power dynamic. Oh, we're being too rough on them. I'm like, no, you're meeting them at their level of manipulation because they're gifted kids, and we have to adjust for the deviants. I don't care if you look like a maniac on Facebook when you're talking about it. It doesn't bother me because people don't really know what you are up against and how clever you have to be to make it work, right? So give yourself the permission to be creative and to make it okay and to say, I'm going to predict what the issue is going to be and then prescribe a solution that's going to fit our family and what we need and where our kid is at developmentally and where we're at and what we can stay consistent with, right? That's the other thing you got to manage as parents. For some parents, they struggle with executive functioning. And when I say, well, you need to put this plan in and stay consistent, they're like, yep, makes sense to me. Got it. No problem. I'm on it. And they're like, we couldn't do it. And I said, well, okay, that's all right. We got to manage. We got to step back. We got to reevaluate. You missed some things. You have some vulnerabilities. Now let's use that as a way to connect to your kid who is suffering from the same issue, right? So it's a process. Everything is a process. We're never fully done, okay? And that can be exhausting. Now, I will put this as my last point, and then we'll wrap up here. Sometimes nothing works. You could do everything perfectly. You could be the star of Parent Magazine on the cover, and you could do everything right and say everything in the right way, and it still ends in disaster. And that is when you need help. And you are going to discern when your limit is, where you've had enough. And I don't care if, sometimes one spouse will say, no, they're fine, just let it go. And another spouse is like, my gut tells me that we are not okay. Trust the gut of the spouse that's saying that, believe me. It'll save you a lot of pain in the long run. I'm a big believer in trust the mother's gut. I know that's a little sexist, but it's never steered me wrong so far. So, it is okay to realize that this issue, when you start to understand the complexity of it and how it forms and all the layers of it and all the different systems in place and how it's all interact, you can be like, oh, well, no wonder we didn't solve anything. It's not that we're bad parents. We just vastly underestimated what we were up against. And that's the message I really want to get across. Okay. This is bigger than what most people present it to be. All right, I think that's it. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, Miranda. I tried to go pretty quick.
We are doing fine on time. We have had quite a few people on, but not a lot of questions, and it could just be because we're driving or preparing dinner.
Yeah.
You had a couple of people ask for recordings of the presentation because they can't give it 100% of their time right now, but they are very interested in the topic. And someone, I'm going to probably butcher their name, Majka, from Canada, joining us from Canada tonight, said very interesting topic. And she agrees that, everyone involved is part of the issue and part of the solution. So
I love that. I love to hear it. And that is huge. If you walk away with that, I feel like I'm a big success. So thank you. Those are kind words. Yeah, 100%.
And I think,
Yeah, we weren't,
I kind of, we were talking, I felt like, I think parents' reticence to like enforce it is that sometimes parents also have screen time problems like that we
yeah, right.
and so it's like sometimes we're like, well, I gotta set an example, or if the kid because they are gifted, they're like, but you're on your screen, you're on your laptop, you're sitting on the couch. There's a little joke out there about like we sit in front of the big screen and we look at our little screens and we send each other videos from our little screens, and then we stare at our person watching the little screen to make sure they laugh, all the while something's on the big screen, and like that's the nightly routine.
Yeah.
And I think if we as adults are struggling with some of those things, then definitely it's hard to really look at the kid and say and argue that we need to enforce it for them.
And what you're bringing up is probably maybe the most important element of all. This is a human issue. This is an issue that applies to everyone, right? It's an issue of asking yourself, why do I feel so reliant on behavior that I know intellectually isn't the best for me? There is a struggle underneath on some level. I can tell you, if I can be a little vulnerable, it's like, I know I look at my phone too much. And my kids go, when they say, Daddy, stop looking at your phone, I'm just like, oh, I just got caught and I can feel it. And I know it's because I'm trying to cope with this idea of I feel like I should be, playing with my kids right now and being more attentive, but I'm so tired and I'm exhausted and I feel overwhelmed. And, I'm on some level, there's this self-care issue that I'm missing. And it's kind of like, if you start to really look at all the different things that you want to make happen in your life, you can start to feel overwhelmed. And look, if you look at your screen every now and again, you zone out, you're a human. It's okay. But it's because we all have these vulnerabilities. We all have this need to develop and be better and be more ourselves. Really, it's what it is. Not about better. It's about just being more you.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes we have engage in behavior that covers that up, and it's coping. So I love that. I think that's a really key point to take away.
And we do have a question that just jumped in. They asked how we could connect, and I took the information off of your last slide here and put it on the chat. So for those people who are listening who would like to connect, I put your email and your website on there. Yeah. Liana is wondering how to help scaffold executive functioning for those
That's
students.
A great question.
Child that says the school does not seem to want to support the student with executive functioning. So how can parents support the student with that?
So first thing is you're going to send me an email. You're going to tell me what school district, and you're going to offer me to come train the teachers pro bono because teachers need to understand that executive functioning are skills. It is an important part of the process, and kids are not moral. I have a whole thing on executive functioning, moral failure versus like a moral failure, right? They're not. Now, more realistically, Peg Dawson is the author you want to look into, Smart but Scattered. And she has a lot of concrete functional ideas for how to scaffold and work with executive functioning. Some of them, they don't all fit for every kid, right? But Peg Dawson is a great resource for that. My friend and colleague Julie Skolnick just came out with a book. It's over here. What's
Yes.
it called? Gifted and Distractible. And she has an enormous amount of strategies in there that can help support as well. But there's a lot of stuff out there. Understood.org is a big website. It's centered around like ADHD, but it's all the same stuff as far as creating more awareness around that issue, how it impacts kids, and how we accommodate or support the growth of that stuff. Yeah.
I'm also tagging Julie's With Understanding Comes Calm,
Yeah.
if I can.
Yeah, that's yeah, her she's a great resource and she really loves these kids and does such great work with the parents.
Yeah. And the Gifted and Distractible, she presented at CAGT. And I think a lot of what she had to share was really practical strategies for parents as well and for teachers. And I did put the Smart but Scattered in there as well. I think it's one of those things that sometimes, I mean, like I even think about my juniors this year as sophomores. I forced them to keep a notebook and I helped them organize the notebook, and I put the notebook, I was like,
Yep.
these are your pages, and I said, okay. And they were, they just rolled their eyes and they hated it, and half the time we'd spend all this time organizing it and then they wouldn't put anything in it when we were supposed to be putting in it. I'd say, this is the page you should be on, and they were like, and then it would be nothing, and I'd go look at the notebooks, and I didn't check the notebooks for a grade, but I go look at them and be like, you know, oh, do you have this? Do you have this? And they'd be like, no, I didn't do that. So this year I have juniors and seniors, and I was like, you know what? You're going to, for those of you that are college bound, you're going to have to figure this out. No one's going to hold your hand on how to organize this. I modeled it for you last year because I had the same kids last year. You need to do it yourself this year. It's a disaster. I have open note quizzes, and there are kids who don't have notes to reference. And
Yeah,
and I'm
right.
like, so I taught it, but I need to reteach it and reteach it and reteach it and reteach it. And we can't just say take notes. We have to say take notes this way. We can't just say this is your unit, take notes on this. And I worry, if we continue to scaffold, then are they going to be prepared to be independent by the time they get to college? Am I scaffolding too much with those executive
No.
supports?
Almost never are you scaffolding, because remember, in a gifted kid, their development can go in leaps, right? It feels like they're never going to get it, they're never going to get it, they're never going to get it, and then all of a sudden, shaboom, they're like the best one in class, right? So stay okay. That the other problem is if they've come to your, because you teach high school right now, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if they've come to your place and they haven't been introduced to executive functioning skills and note taking, it's already too late in a sense. Like I mean, not that it's never really too late, but I want that stuff being taught in like third grade or even before, because that is really, you want that to be a skill that is drilled in and understood of the importance of it, and that it's an ability, it's something you work on. For too long, education's been around. That's just a thing. Stay organized. And
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, they're
What
like,
does that
I
mean?
don't even know, what does that mean? I don't know how to do that. Or I can do it for a week and then I don't know how to sustain it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this issue of how you integrate support from school and at home, because parents need to help with that as well. And that you give it to them in the right context of understanding that this is a life skill that comes into every, part of, I can go into like, we work with adults and couples and families and stuff, but a lot of the marriage issues that come in are more around the executive functioning failings of one of the two people. And when that starts to get addressed, all of a sudden they're happy as clams. Like everything's good all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times, executive functioning is at the root of a lot of relational problems.
Oh yeah.
I'm not able to like maintain that connection or whatever it is because I get organized or I forget about them or I don't know how to prioritize or whatever. Right. So,
And I think to come back to like the video game thing, I think that there's certain executive functioning skills that are taught in certain video games, especially the ones that are like story based, where you have to meet this thing before you can meet this thing and go here before you can go there, and you need to collect this before you can go here. I mean, that's some spatial and mental awareness and organization that like I wish we could figure out a way to channel that into their like how do you do things, like how do you prioritize things in a day, because they're prioritizing in video games all the time, but how do you prioritize
right.
in real life? And the point is that they're mastering the video game, and that's they feel safe in that mastery. And but we're not teaching them how to translate those mastery executive functioning skills that they're playing in video games into like real life. I think part of it is because we don't want to acknowledge that that's a skill or
as value, and that there's skill in it. Yeah, absolutely, there's skill in it, and
yeah.
absolutely they are tapping into their prefrontal cortex to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't generalize it out of the game, which is what
Yeah.
you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that because there's no generalizability into more real life tasks, yes, nobody has developed that crossover yet,
Yeah.
right? But I'm a big believer in like, look, I don't even care if your kid wants to get more talented at gaming. If you frame it as, okay, we're going to get you a gaming coach, and you're going to commit to practice, and you're going to commit to scaffolding, and you're going to commit to working and doing intentional practice, that's great. Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
That's the life skill I'm talking about. I don't care that it's happening in gaming. It can happen anywhere in their life. But that way to how do I build and develop and grow and stay committed and consistent with something, that is the life blood of what, makes somebody successful.
The grit and the stick with itness that you need to like accomplish all kinds of things can be taught.
Totally. Absolutely. Yep.
Well,
I love it.
I was talking to students the other night. I talked about surgery and like a family member who had a surgery, and it was a laparoscopic where they go in with the little like tools in through tiny holes in the body, and the surgeon actually sat 10 feet across the room behind a screen with controllers. And I remember a family member asked like, well, how'd you learn to do this? And the surgeon said, honestly, video games. He goes, I've learned
100%.
like just a lot of his skill. He, obviously has awareness of anatomy and all that, but like his practice there translated into a real actual skill that he uses to help people.
There's actually research that, because the research showed that there's not much generalizability. So it's like just because they're good at games doesn't mean that translates to real life. But there are certain scenarios like that one
Mm-hmm.
that do. So for example, one of the main skills you need is your visual spatial monitoring as you're watching for things to change and shift, especially like first person shooters. It can be like minuscule and you got to notice it. That translates almost directly to an air traffic controller who has to monitor, a screen and where everything is going and what's like it's the same level of skill.
Oh yeah.
So, again, it's still all, it's not useless, it's not a waste of time. For some people it's really itching us, or scratching an itch around, the story of it and the art of it and the beauty of it in games. Like that can happen too, and that's just as important, right? I'm not throwing out games, right? Nobody should, in a sense. It's just when it becomes the sole proprietor of their time and energy and development that something's up, right? And as a former hardcore gamer myself, who basically barely got through college while I was playing World of Warcraft, I can attest that my executive function skills were crap, that I had no idea how to really learn to study. I had no idea how to take care of myself in that way. Now, luckily, I've moved past all that, but it was a challenge. And there's a lot of shame in that and disappointment when you think you're supposed to be this smart, capable, they're going to go on to do great things kind of a kid, and you're not doing it.
And I think, one of the things I took away from your talk, and we'll wrap up here because I don't have any more questions coming in, but I do think one of the things I took away is how you approach that. And not to, as a parent, I think our instinct is to be like, oh my God, all you do is play those stupid video games and no one understands what they are. And you just down there like shooting and blasting things up and it has no relevance to anything. And you spend all your time doing that. But if that's the place your kid feels successful and then that's how you talk about it, you could very easily create a divide in trust and a total lack of understanding. And that's what I kind of got away is like, how do you approach the problem in a way that like acknowledges their feelings of success, but they probably also acknowledge they neglect their hygiene, they neglect their friends, they neglect their health and their sleep. They probably know that, but they just need to know that someone else is there to help with that and not criticize it.
Right. And we're not about getting them to perform. We want them to understand that there's a dilemma there, and what they're feeling about it is most important. Like you have to get to that feeling, that emotional understanding before you get behavioral.
Mm-hmm.
The number one mistake that therapists make with gifted kids that don't know how to work with gifted is they go behavioral way too quickly and they lose the kid every time. And so it's now I actually have an entire presentation on on that, and negotiating with gifted kids and what that looks like. Because it's such a big topic, and how do we do it, and what's the framework that we need when we're having these conversations, and it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the perspective that this talk gave me. I hope that other parents do as well. There are quite a few people actually on here, just not a lot of questions. I think probably they're like me, and I'm used to doing this. I've been doing this for 3 years. So this type of dialogue is easy for me. Some people are probably still processing, but there are quite a few people who want to see, to watch this again, and just you access your resources. So if you would share your slides with us, maybe the pictures will work when you share it with us.
Yeah, I'll figure that out, and then
That's
I'll
such a
send them.
bummer.
Yeah, well, I know it is, right? Whatever, it's all right. I'll live.
But we will post the recording and we will post the slides, and then everybody can access it on our website. I posted the link to our website on the chat as well. But we really appreciate you coming and sharing this. It's been a perspective we haven't had yet on our talk. So I appreciate the unique point of view that you share with us today, Mark.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It feels like a real privilege to be able to do this. So thank you. And I'll be sure to send all that stuff out.
Absolutely. And we will have people coming up in 2 weeks and to talk about to talk on the program again. I'm trying to get the slides pulled up while I fumble, but we always try to have diverse topics. And I hope that I know that this is a topic of conversation I have with parents all the time. So I really appreciate that this was something we spoke about. It looks like our next presentation isn't until January 16th. So we're taking a big old we're taking a college size Christmas break is what we're doing. But we'll be back January 16th with Mark Hess as our presenter and Emily Andrews to talk about gifted visual and performing arts, creativity. So that will be another perspective we haven't talked about much on this program either. So join us in a month and a half, which will be here before.
Oh my gosh, I'll bring my team with me too, because this has been really fun, and there's a lot of cool stuff here, and Mark's such a great speaker and very knowledgeable guy, so I'd be happy to do it. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate everybody joining us tonight, and we want to wish everybody a happy holidays, a safe and healthy happy holidays, and we will see everybody in a month and a half. I'm going to stop the live stream now. Everybody have a great evening.